Hello and welcome to Data Leaders. Thank you very much for joining us, hopefully joining us again. We had some great comments and some new subscribers last week, so thank you very much if you have subscribed. And remember to make sure, if you're watching this and you want more weekly updates from Data Leaders, to subscribe and hit the bell. Please like and comment also, because that helps the algorithm, it helps us get found, and it helps us build our community. So this week we're going to go through 6 items, as said, within 20 minutes. So it's going to be quite quick and we have a lot to cover. So the first item that I want to cover is data democratization. And this is an interview with Stuart Hughes from Rolls-Royce that was conducted by Databricks. So I want to give you an overview of that. The second item, the Open Data Institute, where I'm spending a lot of my time in the Open Data Institute at the moment. They have a really great canvas. It's not perfect. I will point out some of the gaps in it, or the dangers of using it in certain instances. But the data ethics canvas I'm going to go through, which I think is really useful. And of course, if any of you have used it, I'm really interested to hear from you. The third item is something you will not want to miss. There is a 30 billion euro opportunity in data governance, and you might be surprised to hear that, but there's a 30 billion euro opportunity. Stay tuned and see item 3 to learn more about that. After that, we're going to talk a little bit about AI before we get to our last subject. So 2 items on AI. First of all, we're going to be looking at Dall-E, which is an AI capability that takes text and turns it into images. So you can describe what you want to see and it will create an image for you. And the next piece is really to the embracing AI to survive. That's a piece by Kearney. And I'm going to walk through that and give you an overview and a highlight of what Kearney say about AI more generally in order to survive. And then the last piece, and really stay tuned for this because it's a really important piece. It's a review of a Harvard Business Review piece that talks about why it's so hard to become a data-driven enterprise or a data-driven company. The big question we always ask, and what we're responsible for in terms of transforming our organizations ourselves. So we know it's hard, but this HBR document really breaks down why it's so hard and why people are struggling with it. So without further ado, let's get into it. We have 20 minutes to get through this content. I hope you enjoy it. Make sure, by the way, you subscribe and tick the bell to make sure that you get updates every time we post new content. Hi guys, it's Chris. Just a quick one. I've just finished editing this video and it is not 20 minutes. It's nowhere near 20 minutes. It's 46 minutes. Sorry. So anyway, we're gonna figure it out, right? So I didn't want to cut too much of it out. I've included points that you can jump straight to the individual components of the video, and the timings are in the description of the YouTube video. So take a look at those if you want to go directly to a piece. I'm really interested in which pieces you liked, which pieces you didn't. I'll put a poll up on the LinkedIn group. I really want to hear from you in that respect. I'm really sorry it's 46 minutes long. That was never the intention, but 6 topics this week, 3 next week. I'm learning as we go, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. Okay, so this is the Champions of Data and AI. It's the Databricks video with Stuart Hughes, who is the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Digital Officer for Rolls-Royce. His background is actually in tech startups very much, and he reflects that in the first part of the video. Again, this video is 45 minutes long, so you might not want to watch the whole thing, but if you fast forward past the bit at the beginning, you get into some of the real content. So I think you go 15 minutes in, which is the real introduction to Stuart and his background. Of course, Stuart comes from Manchester, and he somehow describes that as the cool part of the UK. I'm from the UK, I'm actually from London. I don't know. Nothing against Manchester, of course, but I don't know that it's the cool part of the UK. Who knows? There are many cool parts of the UK, and I'm only kidding, Stuart, if you're watching this. It's a great part of the UK, obviously, with Manchester United. He believes at some point that Manchester ruled the world, but who knows? So anyway, on to the topic. Stuart provides some really good advice on MVPs and creating the value, and focuses very much on the value that's required in order to deliver data and democratize data. But he also talks a lot about using native tools, so that not everything requires a data lake with every piece of data in it to be able to be successful. And of course there are distinct pieces of data throughout our organizations that can be leveraged relatively quickly to be able to enable the business to do what they need. He also talks about a data passport, which is which he emphasizes there's a need to understand the lineage and have a consistent review of process to be able to understand where the data comes from, and particularly in the context of Rolls-Royce, obviously they're dealing with a lot of sensitive data, a lot of what he calls safety critical data. And the safety critical data is the data coming from the engines of planes in flight, and much of the other data that he needs. So in that context, classification of that data continues to be important. And he utilizes Databricks to really federate the use of data, to make data available across the organization. We don't get into a lot of technical detail in the video in terms of how he does that, but he also reflects on the tension between technology, shadow IT, and the line of business, and the challenges of doing those things in isolation. Lack of access to the right data, being able to move data into production, and the challenges that exist around that. I think this video is really worth a look. It's worth a view. Again, it's 45 minutes long, so it's a big chunk of time. I don't think necessarily you need to listen to the whole thing, and it's broken down pretty well. Actually, the Databricks site breaks down the components of the interview pretty well. It gives you a full transcript of the video, and it gives you the audio version as well. So it's really flexible in terms of how you might want to consume the content, and give it a look. I'll include a link to the video down in the description on the YouTube channel. Okay, so let's now talk about the Open Data Institute and their data ethics canvas. So and you'll have to excuse me, guys, I'm talking so much I've got a frog in my throat. So rather than continue to stop and start, I'm just going to push on through. So the Open Data Institute, hopefully you know these guys. If not, I would really recommend that you become a member. They've got a lot of really, really useful stuff in the data domain, and in particular, this data ethics canvas. So they talk about this canvas, or the organisation and communities use data to make better decisions more quickly, and they envisage that future. And I believe in that also. I think I align very closely with the ethics and the approach that the Open Data Institute are taking. And to bring about this future, we must make data as open as possible whilst protecting people's privacy, commercial confidentiality, and national security. And we must identify potential ethical issues associated with a data project or activity. And you'll see they talk about this as this data ethics canvas being part of the project delivery. And we recognise actually as one of the first challenges you're going to face in using this is that it doesn't need to be, but you want to put it into the project delivery lifecycle. And we know even in many cases, just getting data recognized at the beginning of a project delivery lifecycle is pretty challenging in most large organizations. So I think that's improved significantly over the years, but hopefully recognize that this needs to start getting embedded in the process in order for it to be effective. But any use of this is a step forwards, to be perfectly honest. So let's talk about what the Data Ethics Canvas actually is. Data Ethics Canvas is a tool for anyone who collects, shares, or uses data. It helps identify and manage ethical issues, and importantly, at the start of a project that uses data and throughout that project. So obviously not just at the start, but when things change and as things adapt as you move through the project itself. It encourages you to ask important questions about projects that use data and reflect on the responses. So it gives you a couple of examples of the questions that you might ask. So what is your primary purpose in using this data for the project, and who could you negatively affect by the use of data in this project? And also the Open Data Institute do a pretty good job of describing what data ethics is, and they also provide training around this. So I say becoming a member is very cheap. It's about £100, I think, from memory, each year. and it's really worthwhile, particularly for some of these tools and capabilities that you get access to. So data ethics is a branch of ethics that evaluates data practices with the potential to adversely impact on people and society in data collection, sharing and use. And I think that's a pretty good description. And also what you'll see is this data ethics canvas actually leverages an existing ethics canvas. And again, I'm a big supporter of doing that, because there's so much existing research and existing methodology and capability in the ethics space that we don't need to reinvent the wheel around data ethics for certain. So it also talks about data ethics being addressed at all stages of a program or all stages of a data lifecycle. So stewarding the data, creating information from the data, so deriving other components for analytics, insights, stories and visualizations, and deciding what to do. So informed by information from multiple sources, along with experience and understanding. So pretty good approach in terms of data ethics. This is the set of questions. I'm going to take you through the actual data ethics canvas now. So here it is, and I guess I'm going to start off on the left. It talks about, it repeats a little bit of the information I've just shown you in terms of what the data ethics canvas is, and it talks about its original source, again leveraging existing capabilities in the ethics domain. This really talks about finding the balance of this pendulum. So the balance between fearing the data, not using the data because of fear for regulation or whatever else it is, obviously aligning with those regulatory components, but it gives you a structure to avoid fearing the data and avoiding data hoarding, so using data or hoarding too much data that's not necessary for the project. And obviously the objective here is to create a positive impact. And it really talks about engagement, equity and ethics, and on this side innovation, capability and infrastructure, and getting the balance between openness and trust. So this kind of introductory page gives you an idea about what ethics is, and we've just covered that a little bit, but why to use the tool. And I just want to point out one thing here. We'll talk about all four. So improve project planning, grow impact and trust, complement other ethical guidelines, and manage data ethics in the long term. And this is the piece I just want to bring a little bit of attention to. Complementing other ethical guidelines. Within your organization, there is most likely to be some kind of ethical guidance already in place as part of the ESG program of work your organization probably follows. And in that context, leverage that, make sure that you use that. But equally, you will, and one of the things this canvas doesn't do for you is set up the framework for data ethics within the organization. And I think that is an important piece of work. And it does talk about, think about who you need to involve, get leaders on board, and consider data literacy. And I think these are three really important components as well. So don't just pick the data ethics canvas up and then just expect it to work immediately. That's probably not going to be successful. What you need to do is have the conversation in the organization about how data ethics might work, how it gets embedded in the process, but also how do you generate data ethical principles or ethical data principles in the organization to give you some guidance. Certainly some of the work I did back at ING in terms of creating the data ethics program really spent a lot of time engaging with the organization and boiling down ethical data principles to allow a structure as part of the organization to be able to make decisions and to be able to have those decisions raised. So equally, the question that this tool doesn't necessarily answer is, all right, what do you do if you can't resolve an ethical dilemma? It gives you a really good framework to identify those ethical dilemmas, but what if you can't decide? There needs to be a capability within the organization for you to have that conversation, for you to escalate that conversation, and for you to have the right body of people in place to make decisions and to document those decisions. So this doesn't go as far as doing that, but it does provide you a fantastic canvas for you to ask the questions that you need to ask. So let's briefly get into it. Again, I'm not going to go directly into every component, but I want you to see what the ethics canvas is and how it might work for you. So really this is a pretty good framework for you to look at the data sources that are going to be involved in the particular project, any limitations that might exist within those data sources, and what you might be sharing or not sharing. So let's just look at some of the, if I can get this to zoom in, there we go. So questions it asks, are limitations that could influence your project's outcomes? So you should consider bias in data collection, inclusion or exclusion, analysis and algorithms. So how is the data being collected? Are there things that are not being collected that would be important to the analytical outcome? Gaps or omissions in data, similar thing. Provenance and data quality, excuse me, and other issues affecting decisions, such as team compositions that might affect the way data is collected or used in the organisation. So that's the first thing. Sorry, my mouse or my computer is not going as fast as I would like it to. There we go, it's catching up. So sharing data with others. Are you going to be sharing data with other organisations, and if so, who? Or are you planning to publish any of the data, and under what conditions are you going to do that? And then it talks about ethical and legislative context, and this is going to be, I think, critically important. So let's try and zoom in. What existing ethical codes apply to your sector or project? So particularly if you're in healthcare or some other organisation that requires the ethical conduct and storage of data, what legislation, policies or other regulations shape and how is data going to be used. And then it gives you some considerations to think about: the rule of law, human rights, data protection. And of course, remember, and I don't think this is saying anything different, but remember the rule of law is the baseline. It's not the level or the standard that you need to reach. You may well need to reach higher standards. And of course, equally, the rule of law can be conflicting with itself. So recognise that and do the right analysis. It talks about rights around data sources. So where did you get the data from? Is it produced by an organisation or collected directly from individuals? Was the data collected or for this project or for another purpose? So important to recognise the purpose the data was stored in the first place. So zooming right out, that's the first row. Again, you can see there's a lot of stuff to get through. So your reason for using the data and communicating your purpose for the data, and of course what positive effects might be created by the use of this data, and perhaps equally as more important, the negative effects that could be a result of the data being used. Going on to the next row, engaging with people. So if we zoom in here, how can people engage with you about the project? How can people correct information, appeal or request changes to the product or service? And are appeal mechanisms reasonable and well understood? And again, we're sort of touching on some of the components of GDPR in that context. Openness and transparency. So how open can you be about the project? Is it commercially sensitive? Could you publish your methodology, metadata and data sets? Can you actually sort of start to meet some of the objectives of the Open Data Institute in its own respect? Can you ask peers for feedback on the project, and will you publish your actions? Excuse me. Will you publish your actions and answers to this canvas openly? And there may be some instances where you can't do that. So it's not saying you must, it's just asking the question so as you can be challenged on some of the potential dilemmas that might create. And that may lead you to other questions, of course. So ongoing implementation. Are you routinely building in thoughts, ideas and considerations of people affected in your project, and how are you doing that? What information or training might be needed to help people understand the data issues? And reviewing interactions. How will ongoing data ethics issues be measured, monitored, discussed and actioned, both in terms of this project and more broadly? But in the context of the canvas, it talks about the project you're going to be working on. And what actions will you take before moving forward with this project? What should you take? What should take priority? Who will be responsible for these actions? And this really starts to say, to give you an idea that you need to create a structure in the organisation that is able to deal with these things, that is able to, if you can't reach the decisions you need to, that there's a body to be able to escalate that to. So it does talk about who to get involved, but I think it underestimates slightly the work that you need to do to drive that in a large organisation. It will be key to set up the right structures, as I've mentioned. But hats off to the ODI for creating this. I think it's an incredibly useful tool and something that you should be looking at in your organisation. So I think that's it from for the ODI Data Ethics Council. Canvas, once again, I think it's a really useful tool. Have a look at it. I will provide the link in the description below. And now let's move on to the next subject. And the next subject is indeed that 30 billion euro opportunity in data governance. And it might not be as sexy as you might have thought with my introduction to it. So the European Union have a proposal for regulation, the European Data Governance Act, and you should know about this. It predominantly relates to the measures that the European Union will take over governmental type data, but it also means that that data is going to be much more available and much more usable for you in your projects. The really interesting thing about this is it represents and it analyzes, it looks at that this is really a 30 billion euro opportunity in terms of the opening up of the digital economy within Europe. So this is part of the European data strategy, and that is all available for you to see. I'll create the links in the description below, and this is a very long document that you may want to read if you think it's important to you. Certainly the key things I've started to highlight here. Recognize the European data strategy. The instrument aims to foster the availability of data for use by increasing trust in data intermediaries and to try to strengthen data sharing mechanisms across the EU. So data sharing amongst businesses against remuneration in any form, and it talks about the creation of a personal data sharing intermediary. Now, the Act as a whole, or the recommendation of the Act as a whole, also tries to limit the impact of it to existing regulations and laws, so it doesn't necessarily change those very much. It does not aim to grant, amend, or remove the substantial rights or access to the use of data. This type of measure is envisaged for the potential Data Act 2021, and it is consistent with other union policies, and it covers fields such as the automotive industry, payment service providers, smart metering information, electricity network, intelligent transport systems, environmental information, spatial information, and the health sector. So it covers a broad range of sector-specific legislation on data access. And it goes on to say that setting up governance structures and mechanisms that will create coordinated approach to using data across sectors and member states would help stakeholders in the data economy to capitalize on the scale of the single market. So the European Union really is trying to create a single digital market, and it sees that as a competitive opportunity. If data can be shared simply across borders across Europe, then Europe will sit in a very strong position to be able to share that data and compare and contrast that data across individual member states. So, again, this is a very long document. It talks about proportionality, it talks about the choice of an instrument, and it talks about regulation as that choice of instrument. And it talks about a lot of data governance type issues in terms of how the European Union wants to deliver data governance as a capability, and how data should be shared across boundaries within that organisation, certainly for public sector bodies. What's interesting here is, well, first of all, I've started to write a blog on this, but just to give you some stats, the Commission received 806 contributions, of which 219 were from companies 119 from business associations, and 201 from EU citizens or individuals, 98 from academic and research institutions, and 57 from public authorities. Consumer voices were represented by 7 respondents, and 54 respondents were non-governmental organisations, including 2 environmental organisations. 230 position papers were submitted, either attached to a questionnaire, or 210, or a standalone contributions 20. So a lot of people have responded to this. There's been quite a consultation process associated with it. There's been an impact assessment that really looks at the types of regulation they want to apply and whether those are stronger or weaker elements of regulation. Like I say, there's a ton of information in here. This is the 30 billion opportunity. The economic value of data sharing is expected to grow from an estimated 533 euros to 533 to 510 billion euros to 540 to 544 billion euros. So a significant jump from 510 to 544 billion euros. So the opportunity in this data governance document represents economic value of around 30 billion euros. So I think it's something you should be taking a look at. This will open up the availability of data, particularly from governmental organisations, and hopefully it will deploy standards that will allow the comparing and contrasting of that data between individual member states. So quite an interesting shift. Like I say, it's a pretty dry document to read. Once you've got through the top part of this document, you get into the real bulk of the document, which is further down. There are 46 individual paragraphs at the top, and then you get into the general provisions and individual components, the categories of data, how data is categorized, so on and so forth. Like I say, I don't intend to go through it all here. I am writing a blog on it, but it is already pretty long. You can see it here. It's not published yet, but you can see that it is in process in terms of what you should worry about, how many of the participants have responded, etc., etc. So that's it for the 30 billion euro opportunity. Like I say, I would spend some time with this document if you think it's important, particularly if you believe that you could use more information from the government, more capabilities from the government of Europe to understand. It also talks about how data will be transferred cross-border and to third countries as well. And it will be requiring third countries, if data is to be shared with third countries, to have a similar level of capability around the data and around data protection and protection of rights of individuals, and of confidentiality and corporate security and secrecy, if that data is to be portable to third countries. So a lot of information in here. Have a look. Worthwhile, and like I say, I'll write a more detailed blog so you can get more information on it. And there is a useful cheat sheet, which is about 2 pages, which I will share on the Data Leaders website, and I'll create a link to that in the YouTube description once it's available. And again, if you are on the mailing list for Data Leaders, I will make sure that you get a notification as soon as that is available, that blog and that cheat sheet. So the next point we want to cover is, that's the European data governance piece, is Dall-E, creating images from text. So what is this all about? So Dall-E is an open AI capability that has been created to create images from text captions. And I just thought this was an interest piece, actually. I'm not going to get too deep into any of the technical detail about this, and I don't even think I'm qualified to do so. But it takes a wide range of concepts expressible in natural language. Dall-E is a 12 billion parameter version of GPT-3. So if you don't know what GPT-3 is, again, very worthwhile looking into GPT-3. It is significant in terms of the context of AI, and it's making quite an impact. GPT-3 trained to generate images from text descriptions using a data set of text-image pairs. We found that it has a diverse set of capabilities, including creating anthropomorphic anthropomorphized versions of animals and objects, combining unrelated concepts in plausible ways, rendering text and applying transformations to existing images. So I thought this was interesting. An armchair in the shape of an avocado. Maybe you don't. It's not the most interesting thing you've seen today. But literally, that was the input. So the input is an armchair in the shape of an avocado, an armchair imitating an avocado. And the AI generates these images, which I think are pretty accurate. You know, I mean, the color's right, the shape's right, even very artistic versions of this, and very simple versions of an avocado armchair. So just one example of what AI can do and the interesting ways that AI can be used to generate artistic interpretations of words. So I thought it was really interesting, worth sharing, just an interest piece, but take a look. And in particular, if you're interested in AI, you should take a look at GPT-3. Perhaps I'll do a separate piece on that. But AI is so important, it really leads us into our next subject in terms of how to survive, or how to use AI to survive. So let's talk about that. So, how to survive with AI. I really like this article. Okay, this article's from Kearney, and it talks about embracing AI to survive. It's not a really new article. Again, I'll create a link and put it in the description below. But it's really useful because I think it doesn't talk in highly technical language, and it explains the opportunity. So I'm going to walk through this, give you the highlights of what it's saying. Excuse me, and I would encourage you to perhaps, you don't need to read it because I'm going to give you most of what it says, but perhaps share it with your leaders in your organization, because I think this really is about how does your organization transform to embrace AI as part of the future. So let's go through it. So Kearney says from Alexa to Siri to factory robots and financial chatbots, intelligent systems are reshaping the industrial world. But the biggest changes are yet to come, meaning there is still time to create winning AI strategies. We're a long way off AI's ultimate destiny of competing with humans to provide complex, contextual reasoning and strategic decision making, or artificial general intelligence as it's more broadly known. The emergence of a technology that teaches machines to think like people has vast implications for employees, businesses, industries, and the economy as a whole, linking directly back to what we said earlier about ethics. Machines have already eliminated many blue-collar jobs, and AI will reshape departments from sales and marketing to back-office administration. For example, cognitive systems have disrupted IT departments, replacing highly paid systems administrators with self-monitoring, self-diagnosing, self-repairing machines. Backed by millions in investment and capital from top tech talent around the world, AI will transform the business landscape even more dramatically over the next decade. Success lies in creating a business strategy that deploys AI, not the other way around, focusing on what a business needs, not on what technology can do. Again, ensuring that these things are business driven. Now, the challenge in that is making sure business leaders actually understand the art of the possible and are properly educated around this space. And these things shouldn't be led by IT, but supported by IT. Exactly the same as my view around the data space equally. So there's a really good section here about what is AI, and it uses relatively simple language, and I like the way that this is set out. AI is a collection of digital tools that enable machines to perceive, learn, and make decisions like humans. Futuristic as it may seem, AI has been around for decades. AI algorithms first appeared in the 1960s, programmed for simple if-then reasoning. They initially found no commercial application, and the technology did not truly develop until the 1990s, with the emergence of limited machine learning systems such as Deep Blue, the IBM computer that defeated Russian chess master Garry Kasparov. Several factors are fueling the surge in AI development, especially in machine learning. Computing power, dramatic increases in speeds, costs are falling because of as computing speeds accelerate. The talent availability, of course, coming out of university, and perhaps most importantly, cultural acceptance. So cultural barriers to AI are crumbling as consumers grow more comfortable with smart features in everyday items such as Alexa and Google and other components that we use every day in our own homes. The continuing evolution of AI, despite its long-term promise, AI probably won't expand beyond a narrow range of business uses for the next few years. And it talks about those individual uses. So commercial applications are emerging in 5 cognitive systems: natural language processing systems that recognize voice and text expression, computer vision, which identifies objects, scenes and activities, pattern recognition systems that find recurring themes and large quantities of data, and reasoning and optimization technology capable of complex inferences and efficient evaluation of various options, and robotics, which integrates cognitive technologies to perform end-to-end physical and cognitive process. Now, I just said that this article is good because it doesn't use complex language. That was a lot of complex language, but it's important that we start to bridge that divide between the art of the possible, the understanding of the technology and the implementation of the technology, because business leaders really do need to start to embrace this and understand what's possible and what the business proposition might be in the area that they're responsible for. In each area, AI has moved along a spectrum of intelligence from rule-based decision-making through supervised learning and into limited applications of unsupervised learning. So again, it's important for everyone to understand that rule-based to supervised learning to unsupervised learning and the differences between each of those. The advances foreshadow AI's potential to develop the essential characteristics of human intelligence, the ability to learn on their own in a context-based and self-aware fashion. And since 2014, some 5,000 AI startups have attracted $40 billion from venture capital firms and the investment arms of leading technology companies. So AI can create benefits in 6 key areas. Data quality, and it first of all talks about, the machine learning algorithms and AI require high quality data, but actually AI is being used to solve that data quality issue, so the requirement will eventually go away. A self-learning machine will be able to do all of this in itself. High frequency acceptable returns can be found when used to reduce labor costs in recurring activities that involve significant human effort. The analytical complexity, AI is well suited to analysing complex sets of data. AI works best in areas that impact, where the impact of bad decisions and the ability to reduce error rates are clearly understood. And the ability to learn. Today's machine learning paradigms can master the underlying process and tasks. And it talks a lot about the AI leaders. So, those being Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and IBM. And Google has changed its rallying cry. This is a little bit old now, like I say, from mobile first to AI first. But it also talks about some more traditional industry players embracing AI, General Electric and Ford, and the companies recognising the importance of cognitive technologies in broader digital transformation. And of course, that is important because we talk so much today about digital transformation without really describing what it really is and how it's going to benefit the business. And AI plays an important component in that. And then really the whole point of the article, the components that we've talked about are really laying the foundations, what it is, how the industry has been adapting to it and finding resources and capabilities in this space. But successful AI transformations start with visionary leaders. And that goes right back to our first point in this video that was made right at the beginning in terms of data democratization. It requires leaders to drive that transformation. Far-sighted but pragmatic executives who embrace cognitive technology as part of a strategic effort to ride the evolutionary wave. Innovation drives their corporate cultures, and leaders at the very top of the organisation support investments in both R&D and in-house venture capital units, undeterred by risk of failure. So those are really, really important points. Innovation drives their corporate cultures, and people may think about innovation as product innovation in their sector, but there's also technical innovation required, and the use of AI is right at the centre of that. And undeterred by the risk of failure. You need leadership that is able to take this on and the risks associated with it and understand how to do that. And the next paragraph really talks about that. Tech companies scrambling to keep their lead, Speed is an overriding imperative, and I don't think that's just for tech companies equally. They adopt an agile approach. They take risks, they fail fast, and quickly move on to the next investment or product iteration. For example, Google acquired machine learning startup Halley Labs and computer vision specialist All Matter. Amazon scooped up a string of AI innovations, including cybersecurity firm Harvest AI and photo recognition company Orbius. So, a lot going on in this space. Companies in other industry move much more cautiously, focusing on their primary markets and related sectors. Internal development and pilot testing of new technologies play a big role in their AI programs. And of course, but it's important to not recognize innovation purely as the product you produce, but how innovation can use AI and other technologies in order to do that. AI will create products, transform organizations and industries, and level playing fields around the world. The race is on, and some contenders have moved ahead, but nobody has a commanding lead. Companies that make fundamental changes needed to integrate AI into their strategies and operations still have the chance to win. Such a revolutionary transition calls for deep changes in every enterprise. So the key to ask yourselves on this is, are you and your enterprise making that change? How are you making that change? And what does it really mean in terms of change within the organization? Far too many times, I think, technology organizations and even data organizations are not helping the business recognize the opportunity that exists enough, and not forcing them also to change, not educating them enough to enable that change either. So that's the article. I won't take any longer on this. Let's now talk about some of the potential challenges in that digital transformation that we're seeing across the board in the Harvard Business Review article and the last article we're going to cover today. Okay, so let's look at HBR. HBR, very briefly, and again, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because we're short on time, almost definitely over 20 minutes this time, but we'll keep working on it. So the HBR article, again, the link will be in the description. Why is it so hard to become data-driven? And I won't walk you through all of this, but I'll give you the key elements out of this report. So this is a C-suite survey of executives representing mainstream companies that's focused on the progress of big data and AI initiatives in those firms. The 2021 report contains 85 Fortune 100 companies and industry-leading firms, and that's a significant increase. It's the biggest response they have had to date, and this survey that's been running, I think, for nearly a decade. It covers some key components in the first part of this report. So, thriving as a mainstream company today means being data-driven. No way to avoid that. Those that don't see their competitors seize market share and erode their customer base. Data-driven companies attract outsized valuations in comparison to the competitors. Examples of Facebook, Google, and others. And now mainstream Fortune 1000 companies are making heavy investments in data, analytics and AI, and we saw that in the previous discussion. So the 2021 report identified two significant trends. Mainstream companies have steadily invested in big data and AI. 91.9% of firms report the pace of investment is increasing. 62% report data and AI investments of greater than $50 million. So consider that in context of what you've got in terms of investment in your organization. Even with record levels of committed investment, firms are continuing to struggle to derive value from their big data and AI investments and to become a data-driven organization. Mostly that is because of legacy data environments, business processes, skill sets, and traditional culture that is resistant to change. Now, recognize there that not once did I mention technology. We touched maybe a little bit on it in legacy data environments, but none of the other three out of the four components that are preventing organizations becoming data-driven are technology. 3 out of the 4 are cultural or business process elements: skill sets, traditional cultures, resistance to change, and business process. Companies are struggling to forge a data culture, compete on data and analytics, and use data to drive innovation. Only 29% report having developed a well-articulated data strategy. In the report, 24% report their organisation is data-driven, and that is a decline from the previous year, where 37.8% reported that they had a data-driven organisation. And I think that is largely because executives are starting to realise what it really means to be data-driven. And perhaps they had overestimated their capabilities in previous years. Equally, the market is moving fast as well. For the 5th consecutive year, executives report that the cultural challenge, not the technology ones, represent the biggest impediment around data initiatives. Now, of course, we know that. Sitting in our seats, we know that. This is not a technology challenge. This is a cultural transformation that needs to be driven by someone who knows how to drive cultural transformation. The technology plays a part, of course, but it is not the key barrier to the transformation. The technology can be found. The technology can be implemented. The report recommends the Chief Data Officer and the corporate data leaders focus on 3 things. They focus on high impact business problems and use cases. They re-examine the way the organisation thinks about data as a business asset. And they recognise that it's a long-term process that requires patience and fortitude. Well, thank you, Harvard Business Review, for clarifying that. I think any of us that have sat in the seat understand it well. This is a major challenge, and boards need to recognise that this is not a technical problem. So I'm going to finish on that. Have a look at the article. It's slightly longer than I've given it justice for. It's actually not that difficult to read. It's quite quick. I think you could probably read the whole article in 10 minutes. But that is the key components that are boiled down into simple bite-sized pieces for you. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. It's our first weekly update and our first weekly set of news. I hope you find the topics interesting. Please comment below if you've got any questions about any of the topics that we've talked about. Remember to like, subscribe, click the bell and comment. All of those things are really going to help the algorithm, and they're going to help us grow this community. And I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care. Bye.